Good afternoon. On September 17th, Junior Achievement of Southwest New England moderated a roundtable discussion titled Mind the Gap, Disparities in Education, as part of JA Responds, a series of conversations created as a direct result of the pandemic and growing attention to racial injustice. We at Junior Achievement are committed to bringing relevant topics to the forefront for discussion, debate, and most importantly, solution. This most recent conversation with community members representing educators, parents, students, and business helped us see that a 1-hour dialogue on the realities of education for Black and Brown students was simply not enough. The systemic issues are far-reaching and deep-rooted in our society. Of the nearly 50,000 young people Junior Achievement serves every year in Connecticut, more than 50% are classified as Black and Brown, and more than 60% identify as coming from lower socioeconomic communities. Now, we know our educators, administrators, and business partners are doing the best that they can. But our recent dialogue demonstrated that even with high-quality educators, committed parents, dedicated corporate support, the system may still be failing thousands of students in our most underserved communities. Now, let me be clear by what we mean when we say system. And when we say system or refer to systemic changes, we are not talking solely about the school system. We are not talking solely about teachers, principals, and superintendents. We are talking about a system that involves many people and institutions, schools, of course, but government, business, nonprofits, community leaders, parents, and even students themselves. We fully realize that schools are under immense pressures right now, and helping to close the widening education gap that exists for far too many Black and Brown students cannot be placed solely on the shoulders of our schools. I hope today's conversation will start to explore some viable and meaningful solutions that spark some real thought, some real impact, and some real change. Thank you again to our panelists for coming back for round 2. And Ghazi, the table is yours.
Thank you, Jeremy. Appreciate that intro. It is definitely a pleasure to be back for our second part of the JA Responds Mind the Gap webinar series. Again, my name is Ngazi Anaji. I lead the entrepreneurial efforts for Junior Achievement of Southwest New England. And back with me are our esteemed panelists and guests. First, let me introduce Dr. Terrell Hill, Interim Superintendent for the Windsor Public Schools. Sabara Gordon, who is Executive Director of CONCAN, a nonprofit organization that brings stakeholders together to improve educational outcomes for Connecticut students. Tara Spain, Vice President of Travelers Foundation and Second Vice President of Community Relations at Travelers. And then last but not least, Stephen Sam, a second-year graduate student at UConn and an endeared Junior Achievement alumni. Thank you guys for being here with me today.
Thank you for having us.
And so the conversation continues. As Jerry mentioned, we were here last together when we spent a lot of time discussing the challenges within our education system here in Connecticut. We compared the system to a ladder that had many missing rungs. We focused on the fact that the rungs represented various gaps that not only existed prior to COVID and the heightened racial injustice, but were exacerbated as a result of both of these pandemics. Technology, social and emotional well-being for our family and our students, academic losses, racial and economic disparities. We also discussed whether fixing the ladder was the best course of action or whether starting from scratch, creating and building a new ladder would do the job. Either way, at the end of the day, the system needs to be fixed, not our students. Rona Milknark states, if the challenge exists, so must the solution. Let's see what our panelists think about the solutions that we should embark upon. Savara, let's start with you. As as we know, the one thing that makes the world go around is money, right? Even in the education system. And the last time we were together, you made a statement, you made a quote, "What has happened the last 6 months will have a lasting impact. There is money, and it is how we are choosing to spend it that ensures our children's success." So I'd like to ask you to expand on that, considering the work that you do. How do we ensure that the money is spent in the right places, the right resources are being used to ensure equitable solutions for our Connecticut students?
Thank you, Ngozi. I when I think about resources, and I think when I say resources, it's not necessarily just money. Connecticut has lots of resources. And when we think about how students are resourced for their education, right now we have a system that resources are placed within institutions, and those institutions are given the trust to make sure that our young people are okay. And our school districts, I think when we think about it right now, are stretched as thin as they can be. They are doing work that they never imagined that they would be doing. However, families still feel like they need more resources. I think we've created a system where we have said, school districts or traditional school districts, you should be the solution for all these issues that are happening. However, we're not going to make sure you have all the tools that you need to make sure that kids are going to be successful. We want you to keep kids healthy, we want you to keep them safe, and we want you to make them to continue to learn. I agree, the kids should be healthy, safe, and learning. However, I think it requires more of a community approach. We have to think about all the individuals and the institutions that exist within communities that could help kids be successful. So, for example, if we think about after school right now, there's lots of after school centers and aftercare centers that could be a part of that community and that village that's helping our kids be successful. So resources should not go from the government to this institution that should be the only holder of the education or the educational outcomes for kids. It should live within the needs of the students, and those students should be able to say, okay, for my K through 12 learning, I'm going to take part in the district piece of it, right? And this is not about taking money away from districts. This is just talking about kids having resources or families having the resources to access what they need. And if a piece of that pie is, we need an after school center right now that's going to be open between 3 and 6 while mom is still at work or dad's still at work or whoever is your guardian that's still at work, we need to make sure that families have those resources to be successful, and kids aren't just going home to sit there and say, well, I don't have a computer, I don't have an adult to watch me right now. The system, the way it was set up pre-pandemic, was there were villages that were taking care of kids. The bus would drive the kid to school. After school, a student would hop on the bus and go to the Boys and Girls Club or go to the YMCA. Right now, we've shifted most of that responsibility, and we've said to the school district, you need to solve for all the things that we were doing pre-pandemic. So I really believe that when we're thinking about recovery and thinking about what we're going to do to make sure we're successful moving forward, communities need the resources that they need to be successful. And we have to think about this in a village approach. We have to think about how we're going to make sure that families have access to the things that they need so students can continue to learn. And it can't fall by the wayside. And we can't look at Dr. Hill and say, hey, Mr. Superintendent, I need you to solve all the problems that we have right now, without thinking about who are some of the partners that he could work with or that families could work with collaboratively with him to make him be successful.
I appreciate that comment because I think it is, very much a village approach that we need to kind of consider going forward. And so, Stephen, Sam, let me kind of kick the question to you in a sense that, one of the comments or quotes that you made in our last conversation really focused on that village approach. And you indicated if students in these communities need to be serviced, provide them with what they need, right? Provide them with the resources. You reference that, you notice very quickly, especially in metropolitan areas, kids are not receiving the same education. There is little equity there. So, I referenced equity, you're referencing equity and this village approach. Let's level set for people. What's the difference between that equity and quality? Are they interchangeable? And what does that mean as it relates to your quote, as far as, like I said, the village approach to kind of the solution?
Thank you, Ngozi. I think at the very baseline level, we need to understand that equality means in the terms of education means treating each student the same. So on a baseline, just a small example, let's say, we have 20 students in the classroom, they all get maybe 20 minutes to do a quiz. Equity is one step above that. It's providing each student with the necessary resources to reach the same goal. So we want all the students to succeed, but not each student needs the same amount of resources to succeed and to reach that goal of understanding maybe the curriculum related to the quiz. So we prefer equity over equality because we understand that students, especially in metropolitan areas, have unique needs that need to be met. And if we just gave everybody the same resources, not all the students will succeed. And I think we see that at a baseline level in some of our communities.
So Dr. Hill, sitting in the Windsor School District, what are your thoughts to that over the resources and whether, from an equitable component, how is that achievable? How do we do that?
Well, I was gonna say it's not easy because, as we know, and I have to kind of go back a little further in terms of the view, as we see it across our country, right? No one wants to give up anything, even if they know giving up something is going to actually make things better for all. So we just have to be real and realize that that's going to take some political acumen. It's going to take sacrifices on various stakeholders' parts. But I think if that's what we want, then we have to pursue it and we have to stay diligent to that. Like, hey, we need this. We know that these things have occurred for so much time, over time, and these people have lost out. So we need to catch them up. We need them. They need something a little different. As Stephen said, it's not like give both of them the same, I don't know, size glove, right? One may need a bigger glove than the other person. They need something more than what they're receiving, because you can't have someone who's been ahead in a race for so long and then you line them all up and say, okay, now you're equal go. This person's had more practice, more training. So that's what you have to do. And I think in a district like Windsor, it's tough, and that's why I'm pausing, because I think our resources are equitably distributed in our district. That would look different from many other districts, so I'm quite aware of the inequities that exist in most other districts, but it's still the same. In some place, you're going to have to tell someone's not going to get something. If that's school funding coming from the state and the federal level, like making those changes, I know that's always been a battle. I remember those battles in grad school in the 90s, reading about districts around the country arguing over school funding. No one wants to give up anything, even though they all say they want to help and they want to see everyone achieve and succeed and they're there for all the kids, but they don't really want to give up anything. So it's going to take a lot.
Any additional comments, Severa, to that, and reference that it's going to take a lot? I assume you agree, right?
It's going to take a lot. And I think the idea, we've built a system where we've created a hold harmless, right? So anything that, and having worked at the legislature for a long time, it's like, it's this year plus, right? There's no city or town that wants to get this year minus. And we've just created a budgeting system, and we've created the way we fund education that it's this year plus. This year plus does not take into account kind of what happened in the last year. Do you actually need the plus, or are you just getting the plus because you've always gotten the plus and you're supposed to get the plus? And we also are not taking into account looking at the districts that have concentrated poverty. Concentrated poverty is one of the weights within the education cost sharing formula. However, it doesn't offset or outweigh some of the other things that I think are most important. We also need to think about how are we funding kids who've had trauma? How are we making sure that kids with English language learners are getting, or English language learner students are getting all the resources that they need to make sure that they can be successful? And add on a global pandemic to that. If you needed one-to-one, if you needed that one-to-one care to learn a language, we're struggling right now with that. So is it really hard? Yes, but it's gonna have to take a shift for how we think about things. It can't be this year plus one. And we all know that if you're in a position and you're managing the budget of a town, you're managing the budget of a school district, you always want to get more. But the question is, and I challenge, and maybe Dr. Hill and I are not going to agree with this, but in the middle of a pandemic, if you are not giving all this, if you are not giving all the things that you were giving pre-pandemic, you probably shouldn't be paid for the 30,000 reams of paper you were going to use that you're now not using. I think the way we've created budgets have not been innovative to actually solve for the things we need. If we didn't have these long-term agreements that you were locked into, not for employment, but just for different services that are provided, we could really think about, wait, we didn't need all that paper. Maybe we could have bought some extra computers. Some districts have lots of flexibilities. Some schools have lots of flexibilities. That is not the same all across the board. So we've created a system that's really big and hard to move and hard to change. And then as we see, when a pandemic hits, you can't take the money and shift it from where you want to shift it from over here to over there, because we are just bound by agreements that make us not able to do that. And I think it's just really important for us to recognize who is the person that's the consumer here, and this is the student. So students need to be at the center of every decision that we're making, whether it's budgeting, whether it's who we're deciding who sits where and what we end up buying. The student is the most important person, and we need to make all the decisions that we can to make sure that students can be successful.
So I would say I don't disagree with you at all, not at all. But I will clarify something for you, because I think there's a misconception, and now I may cause myself trouble with colleagues and newer colleagues, but the districts make their own budgets. So, you know, and I like your example, because I use that example a lot when I'm talking about where we should put our emphasis and where we should put our focus. So reams of paper is not where I want to put my focus. Photocopying is not where I want to put my focus. You know, other than your contractual obligations with collective bargaining units, you have a lot of movement, you know, so even within the grants that people receive. So I will not allow people to give you that excuse, right? So we all can move money. Other than, again, the collective bargaining agreements and, you know, certain contracts that have been set, you know, unaware of any kind of pandemic. If it's paper or anything else, there's so much money that can be moved in a budget. So I would not accept that from anyone. That's what people have chosen to do. And many times people have done what they've always done. Like when you said a year plus, if they're used to the person before them saying, oh, we get $90 million and this is pretty much how we've always done it. You know, I will say this, that most educators are not business savvy. That's not what they went to school for. They didn't go to school for budgeting. I mean, yeah, they're going to get a semester or whatever the case may be in a school finance class, but they don't know anything about budgeting and finance. So they just follow what's there. That's not their area of expertise. That's not their fault, but that's not their area of expertise. When I was in Hartford, when they had school-based budgeting, I was like, oh yeah, I get my money, right? But I went to school for business. Education came later. So for me to look at a budget, it was like, you know, looking through my phone. Like, it's what I'm used to, it's no problem. But I know I had many colleagues at the time who were just like, you understand all that. You know where to move this money. I'm like, you got this much money you can move, you can do this. But they don't know that. And folks don't know that they don't know that. And then people don't want to admit when they don't know something. So they just say, well, that's my budget, I can't. So I just want to clarify that. There's way more flexibility in the budget than people want to admit.
I want to bring, thank you for that, Dr. Hill. I want to bring Tara into the conversation because she sits with, you know, those individuals, those professionals who went to school, right, to look at budgets and understand finance, right, the business community. And so just kind of, you know, supporting the conversation that we're having here, you know, the plus that they're referencing and the need for potentially additional resources, you know, high level talk about kind of what the opportunity is for the business community, especially as we hear in the city of Hartford, where the Dalio Education Foundation helped support Wi-Fi to all the city residents by 2021, right? That's huge. So where do you think the opportunities are?
So last time, thank you for having me here. Last time on the panel, I spoke more as a parent of a student in the district. This time I'm gonna put my corporate hat on and speak more from a corporate perspective. And I think on the last call too, I kind of put a call out, or I don't know, took the corporate community to task a little bit. There are a lot of opportunities for corporations, businesses to contribute to some of the solutions. As Terrell mentioned, you know, corporations have lots of resources that they can offer, not just the finances, not just thinking about, you know, investing in schools from a pure philanthropic standpoint, but really taking their resources and their core competencies to help. And that can be in areas, not just sending, you know, volunteers into the classroom to speak, but it could be, you know, working with districts on budgeting, providing mentoring for teachers on, things that are connected to business competencies and skill building. Helping with data and metrics. I know that's an area that school districts often have shortages in or need additional support in. So businesses have lots of skills that they can lend differently to school districts to help with some of the problems that we're seeing. I think it's time for us to start thinking beyond just being, nice people that go into the schools and fulfill our philanthropic efforts or fulfill our employee engagement efforts, but really taking our core competencies to really help solve some of these problems.
And I think that's a really good point, Tara. I think especially from the business side, I think people who are coming into those roles need to understand that it's going to be a relationship that needs to be built. Like, I don't think any schools are looking for a white hat savior to come in and rescue the day. They want people who are willing to work with them on what they need, as opposed to them coming in and creating demands about how they want to help. So I think that's really important as well.
Yeah, and I think there are a lot of models that we can look at. I'm smiling because Terrell and I have a history of working together doing just that. Terrell was brought in to lead a school that was focused on business and insurance and finance. And he really built out relationships with the corporate community. It wasn't about us coming in to save the day. It was really about taking, Terrell's vision and then using our corporate resources to support that vision and to carry that vision out. And so we help support the school from a corporate perspective in lots of different ways. We had mentoring with students, which is not just, again, going in for a day, although those programs are needed too. It's more about, looking long-term at how, we can support those students. So there's no reason in my mind that any student in this district, at least in the Hartford district, should not have a mentor. There's enough people to go around to provide that kind of one-on-one mentoring to students. We provide professional development opportunities through internships, paid professional development, stipends for students. We did stuff like, we took students to the stock market. Remember that, Terrell? You had students going to the stock market, ringing the bell. We took international trips. We took students to Europe so that they could help build their social capital and their experiences. It can be done, and it's not just about coming in as a savior. It really is about supporting the vision of educators. We're not on the front lines, and so we need to, forge those relationships in a way that's mutually beneficial.
So just to tack on to that, but do you think the business community could be the difference between equality and equity, right? Providing those additional resources were needed to support the students where they need that support.
I'm going to tag team this one with Terrell. You go ahead, Terrell, because I just spoke a lot. But
I'm sorry, you guys. Your voice is quiet. I started to squint so I could hear you. I heard, do you think the business community, and then it kind of got low.
Okay, sorry about that. My question was, do you think the business community could create the difference or establish, kind of to Stephen's point about the, equity being kind of the leg up, could create that difference between what is, what we sometimes think as just equity, right? Everyone getting the same thing, but really starting to create equality and create equity where there's differences that need for different students.
I think,
yeah. Go ahead, Terrell.
So I think what Tara just said actually touched on that. She may have presented it in a very, corporate, but I love what she said, because that's exactly what I felt and experienced, that those corporations, and they said it to me repeatedly, we are not here to run your school. We are not here to take over anything. And we don't want to just write checks, because they held me accountable. We are here to support your vision. And so I want to be clear. I have a list over here of all the partners. I always talk about the community and everyone. It's not just on businesses, but they have a very large amount of resources, and they have a vested interest in their organization doing well. So I believe, and high schooling was definitely, something that showed that if they're vested in seeing the students do well because they see them as future employees, consumers, then they can use their resources to help bridge the gap between wherever there's the equity issues. So again, using the examples that Tara brought up, when I said, hey, they need to go out of this country, because, if we're going to talk about, and it was a finance and insurance focus, but they need to see themselves in other places beyond just Hartford, right? They need to do trips, and they need to be in these companies, not just for a day. They need real internships. One of the things I'm most proud of is the internships they did as high school students right next to college students. So they didn't have to wait till they dreamed to get to college one day to do an internship. They were doing full-fledged paid internships with real responsibilities, with real reporting structures as high school students. And it was required in order for them to graduate from high school Inc. And the corporations help make all of that possible. That people may not think of that as equity work. And I don't even know if all the corporations thought of it as equity work. Tara and I have had countless conversations, but that was equity work because they had to see themselves in an environment first as soon as possible in order for them to see themselves in that environment later on. And I think any of the work that we talk about when it comes to equity is if people believe that something's not for them or is not accessible to them, then they aspire to those levels. But as soon as they learn to believe that it's for me, it's accessible by me, then they aspire to those levels. They go for it. So I absolutely believe companies can help in that equity work. Whether or not they even want to call it equity work, I don't really care what they call it, but their resources can definitely help with it.
So, and I know we're spending a lot of conversation around and a lot of time on this, but I just want to ask one more question because I think, the relationship between Travelers and Hartford High School Inc., was one that was established right pre-COVID, right? And we're sitting in a very different landscape. So, I'll throw this out for all of the panelists. In this new landscape, how do you envision, school districts building the relationships with their business communities when we can't have that face-to-face? What does that look like today?
So let me hop in here because this is something that I'm knee deep in trying to figure out. So for students who don't have safe places to go, what are we doing for them? For students who don't have a parent at home to supervise remote learning, what are we doing for them? I think it's really important for us to come up with innovative solutions. I think we have lots of nonprofits around the state that have space, that have Wi-Fi, that could provide a desk and an adult who is in a safe place for students to go to. However, for example, in New Haven, there's a nonprofit who's charging $300 and said that $300 fee is an impediment for families to be able to come into the space and use the space for their child to have a spot to do distance learning, right? So this is a situation where the school district is already providing the content. There is distance learning available. The nonprofit or the Boys and Girls Club or a church, if you may, already has this space available. What they may not have are the desks. They may not have the plexiglass that my son is so lucky to go to a school that has plexiglass dividers. They may not have all of that, but that's a way to create a strong partnership where the business community can come in and say, I will be able to provide the resources so this nonprofit can open their doors to serve the families. If we're not thinking innovatively, anything, I think our work, bread and butter, is legislative advocacy. Anything we do through legislation will not have an impact on this school year, and it might barely have an impact on the next school year. So we have to be thinking outside the box and thinking about how community and how can we co-create solutions that will work for what families need right now. Because the best distance learning curriculum that's created without having a person who is able to help you at home go through it, if you have a younger child, it doesn't matter. And that across the screen, you can't somehow figure out, are you paying attention? Are you listening? You really need to be able to create a space where every child has someone there who's able to oversee what they're doing. And I think that's just a small thing that we're working on or thinking about, or a small opportunity out there for the business community to get involved with. Because if we don't have young people who end up being educated, who become productive members of society, our social safety net will continue to grow, and we will just have more people at the end of this. Today I started thinking about college and how many kids are actually still applying to college in the middle of a pandemic? How many kids are actually going to college in the middle of a pandemic? You know what's real? The people sitting on this panel are sitting at home and working from home, mostly because you have a college degree and you were able to have a job that allows you to be remote during a pandemic, right? Because you've been able to gain that access. So I think there's ways that we can do things and there's creative solutions, but we have to be thinking through innovative creative solutions right now and not thinking about how things were in the past and how we used to do them, because we're just not there, probably not going to get there for another year and a half. So we're going to think about like what we can do moving forward.
So Stephen,
Can I just
go ahead, Tara.
I was just going to respond to that a little bit, because I do think we do have to be real about where we are and the financial impact that the pandemic is going to have. In times like this, we all know that philanthropy tends to change or look different or dry up. And so that's why it's a very difficult or a very dangerous position when companies do invest from a purely philanthropic standpoint. That's why I said in the last one, we got to get past thinking about our investment in schools as being purely philanthropic and think about it more as an investment in talent, like Terrell said. Because if not, I think what we're going to see is, and we saw, announcements yesterday, I don't know if you guys saw it or not, about companies, creating layoffs and so forth. Companies are going to be struggling too with financial resources, right? And companies draw back on their philanthropy during these times. But if you think about it more as an investment in your future workforce, I think that has a lot more sustainability in it than thinking about it pure philanthropic. And then in terms of answering the question about how do we make those connections now, just like we're connecting now, I have an 8-year-old who's, upstairs on her computer. She knows how to type already at 8. She knows how to navigate the computer better than I do. Students know how, a lot of them, I'm not saying all, and I know that there's technology shortages and difficulties that a lot of people are dealing with, but it's just about being nimble and being able to adapt. And to Sabira's point, having those innovative models. Again, I'm going to do the shameless corporate plug, but this summer, we didn't have an appetite for taking on those high school interns that we've traditionally taken on, but we worked with the nonprofit community who did have the capabilities to provide those internships. And then we provided the funding. Instead of, it being an internship with travelers, they interned with this nonprofit organization and they still were able to get paid. So that's that kind of nimble innovation that Sabira was talking about, and it is possible.
So then I'm pulling you in, Stephen, on both counts. I mean, your future workforce, right, that Tara references, that the business community needs to invest back in and think of as talent pipelining. But then also to Sabira's point about, again, collegiately, like where are our students going and the potential inability in this time to be able to apply for colleges and actually be on campus. I have a daughter who is experiencing her freshman year in North Carolina. And so, it's very much a real thing where she almost didn't go to college this year because of what was going on. So would love to hear your thoughts about the solutions, and you as, again, the workforce of tomorrow, what do you think are the opportunities are around being creative around solutions?
Well, I think we have to make sure that prior to even attending college, students are provided with those necessary skills. And I think Dr. Hill brought up a good point about what they were able to do with High School Inc. Having that understanding of financial literacy and business is essential, not only in that field, but how to operate through life. And I think if you understand that we can provide students with those type of resources, then maybe it isn't directly that they're going to college, that they're picking up some other trade. And I think sitting in a point, I guess it's almost like a position of privilege. I'm on my second degree at this point. So I think it's very easy for me to talk about, work hard and study and go to college, but that realistically isn't always what a student wants to do. We have to give, credence to giving our kids the possibilities of pursuing whatever they want to after high school. But it's important that they have the resources through high school to find that success. I think that financial literacy is a big part of that. I also believe having exposure to just different types of fields, and that's where the business community comes in. Understanding where those positions integrate within our communities, how they impact, the global market, how they impact our societies, and how even an international standpoint, as Dr. Hill said, how these students can see themselves in different places around the world. So I think an immediate solution is understanding that we need to make sure our kids at high school are equipped with the knowledge of understanding how the world works, both from a political standpoint, educational standpoint, and what skills they need to operate it. So as when they go to school, or if they pursue some other different field, they have at least the background knowledge and skills to be able to operate that way. And I don't think we have that for our students right now. So we need to find ways to integrate more, I'll say, life skills and life learning within our high school experiences.
Dr. Hill, would you like to add to that, sitting in the space of educating those high school students? You're on mute, by the way. If you're on mute, by the way, Dr. Hill.
Like not have too much noise come through. Sorry.
Okay.
So I fully agree with what Stephen said. So the only thing I would add there is that you know, even the students at High School Inc., I don't want everybody to think that every student went off and went to Travelers or the Hartford or, you know, Prudential or one of those companies. But the skills that they learn, as he said, those are life skills. And I'm connected to a lot of, you know, my former students still to this day. And many of them have started their own little entrepreneurial ventures. And I am all for that. Again, like I wanted to make sure when I opened the school that the education was going to be relevant and real to them. And I told parents, no, because we got accused of, you're just trying to train workers. I heard that quite a bit. I'm like, I'm not trying to train workers. I'm trying to help students move up and move their station in life. And like I said, I think last time, personal conversations with parents, are you happy with, you know, everything you have right now for your child? If we can help them access even more, you know, that can change the whole trajectory for your family and, you know, your lineage. And I had no parents disagree with that after that conversation. A lot of one-on-ones, but just to have students pick up the skills, as Stephen said, they don't have to go into a corporation. But there is never, you know, a bad time to learn, you know, good financial money management. Like that's like a basic skill. Understanding how society works. You know, you said at the beginning of this panel today, right? No matter what we want to say, no matter what position we sit in, money makes the world go round. Maybe cliche, but it's real. So everyone going to work, whether you're talking about a stimulus check, people need money. You need to go to work to make money. If you can't work, you need someone to provide you with money. So let's not pretend that that's not a real discussion in every facet of society. So I agree fully, Stephen, like perfect.
And to the point Sabira made earlier, I want to make sure that doesn't go unheard. There's even though money and financial literacy is important, we can't ignore the emotional and the trauma portion as a student as well. I think sometimes our schools sometimes get a little too focused on creating, I think what Dr. Hill might be accused of, like good workers in the future. And, you know, you can have the strongest, hardest working individual, but, you know, if they're filled up with this emotional trauma or don't have the necessary social and communicative skills to actually work with individuals, those create their own problems down the line as well. So we need to also have enough, not just have, but enough staff on hand to work with students on an emotional level to make sure that they're coming up as well-rounded individuals.
So you must have been looking at my notes, Stephen, because I was going to take the conversation right there, because I think we do need to highlight the social and emotional well-being of our students and the families that support them. And so, you know, Tara, you made a point or a quote, you made a quote and it referenced kind of the pipeline. I just want to read the quote and then I'll ask my question. In our last conversation, you indicated, we love the volunteers many corporations provide. But when we go around the room and ask why you are here, no one answers with, this is a viable pipeline. There is no reason we are going outside our city to recruit and hire. And so I want to tack onto that, right? Definitely we're focusing on the pipeline, but what I want to bring up is the volunteer opportunity. Again, resources within our community. I think oftentimes from a volunteering perspective, right, we have individuals who come into our schools from the business community and they don't always look like the students that they serve. And so I think there's an opportunity to create a solution around that. Any thoughts about that, Tara?
Just to put it out there, so I think it kind of goes back to what Stephen was saying, right? Like the optics of it are that you have kind of these saviors coming into the school, not necessarily have students that look like, volunteers that look like the students that are being served. Listen, I'm going to be transparent with you. If you go to a lot of the corporations, they probably don't look much different than the volunteers that are coming in. And that's probably a factor of that. Not to say that there aren't Black and brown people in these corporations, because there are, but especially if you start to look at tops of organizations, they look like the volunteers that you're able to recruit. I'm not so opposed to like what someone looks like. For me, it's more about, you know, why they're there, and then, you know, how they approach, you know, being in the schools. I do think we could make more of a concerted effort from the business community to make sure that we're bringing that diversity into the schools. But for me, it's not about what they look like. It's about, how they care, or, what they're bringing to those schools. And again, I go back to Terrell and our partnership. Not everybody around the table that was bringing resources to High School Inc. were Black and brown. I mean, it was diverse. But we did have diversity at the table, and it is important for students to see people of color who've succeeded and all of that. But for me, like the volunteers, is more about, what they're bringing to the table. Terrell, I don't know if you wanted to piggyback off that or not.
Well, you said it. I'll leave that right there.
And I think that's great. And you're totally right. And I think also there's an opportunity, going back to kind of think that Stephen brought this point up, kind of the mentoring component as well, right? To help and support those social and emotional needs of the student. And, and not that the family's not there to do that, but to Sabira's point, sometimes the parent is working, right? And can't be accessible when there's a need around social and emotional. And so, kind of going back to, again, visually seeing someone that looks like them, building that trust, but then also establishing kind of a rapport as a mentor in that space and place. So Sabira, I saw you kind of come forward. Did you want to make a statement related to that?
Well, I think Dr. Hill and I have been talking about this for a really long time. Like, there's a piece of this where, yes, it's a piece of the corporation, but then there's also school districts have a responsibility to make sure that they're hiring and promoting people that look like the kids that they serve. So it is not okay that 14 out of the 15 most diverse school districts right now, it's hard to call charter school districts, are charter schools. There's something wrong with that. It really is, for me, I think there's the piece of it where it's like, yes, there's the corporations and what they come in and how they balance that. Our school districts have to have a commitment to the kids that look like them, that are Black and brown. And I constantly hear the stories, I'm sure Dr. Hill has heard them, finding people who are qualified. There's this, there's that, there's like the whole thing. And at the end of the day, we have 27 or 28 school districts in Connecticut that have 0 educators of color in their building. 0, regardless of what the school population looks like. In 2020, that's not okay. So if we as a state, if we are saying we're committed to equity, we're committed to equity and inclusion, and DEI is the buzzword, but we still have not figured out how to, if someone tells me again that they created a job fair to try to find a Black or brown teacher, I just sometimes want to just pop them, because I'm just like, when's the last time you went to a job fair to go find a job, right? Like, that's not how professionals are recruited. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with job fairs. It's just not how professionals are recruited. But if we are in the education space are going to try to hold corporations accountable, we in the education space, or Dr. Hill or those in the education space, need to hold themselves accountable to those exact same efforts, because you cannot expect kids to see themselves in their superintendent if they've never seen a superintendent that looks like them. You can't expect to see them in the business office, to see yourself in the business office if you've never seen a Black or a brown person running the business office. We think about these things and you're like, why do people say, why do little kids want to be basketball players and football players? Because they see them on TV all the time. Black boys got to see Barack Obama, so now they think they could be president, right? Like, if you didn't see someone that looks like you in these positions, you cannot dream beyond. You might be if you have a great imagination, but you're constantly going to be given the reinforcements to think that you cannot do that, or it's not something for you, or education is not the space for you. And it's not just about being a teacher, it's about being in the education profession. And I think when we're talking about solutions, I think lots of school districts, and this is something I will push and put pressure on and continue to say, need to have the level of commitment that some others do, that say, I am committed to finding candidates of color. If Dr. Hill can find them, I don't think he's going and searching all over the world to find them. I think he's looking in the right places. He's doing the work that's necessary to make sure he has diversity. And I think I really want to just say, we can't in education put the pressure on the corporations and give ourselves a pat on the back and be like, it's okay for us to just continue to be an all-white space.
So I would say thank you, Samira. That so it goes back to the very beginning when I said it's hard. When you talk about the equity stuff, it's the same thing what Samira just said, right? So yes, I actively recruit and pursue folks of color to diversify my staff. Every year our numbers are growing, but as Tara said, transparency. I also get dinged for that. Right? So it's not, because that's not what everybody wants, right? And I can't help but be honest. Sorry, it's not what everybody wants. So it's what I want. It's what I believe is important, because I've had these conversations like hundreds of times. And it's like, I can't keep talking about stuff, right? We said today's panel is about solutions. So when people ask me, I sit on all the committees across the state, all the major organizations. I said, New England, it doesn't matter. It's like when they say, well, how are you able to do it? Because that's what I want to do. I don't even know why people act like it's some kind of magic trick, right? If you want something, you do it. And I'm glad we, like I said, move off corporations. I have a list that I had written up before today's meeting, because I always talked about everyone in the community being involved. And I mentioned last time Harlan Children's Zone. I'm not trying to make them the perfect model, but the idea that all stakeholders have to be involved. So businesses, the politicians, the political arena, municipal offices, religious organizations, community organizations. We talked about the Boys and Girls Club last time. It's not just them, YMCAs, any of them, right? You need to use them, and families, of course. So all of us need to operate as though this is what we want. And communities can diversify their staff very fast when they stand up and speak up. So I'll kind of throw in a plug. I won't even call it shameless, but too often communities of color have been, I feel, over time beaten into submission, right? We can look at the national election, or you can, you go on social media, you clearly it's some Russian bot, or even our own folks, right? Like, we don't even see how sometimes our commentary is just detrimental to us trying to make progress, right? No one's gonna make up for 400 years for you in one election. So, I get kind of frustrated, so I stop commenting, because I'm just like, I feel like then saying stuff like, what are you, an idiot? Like, you've been past 18 for a long time, and now you're just having these conversations. It's no different than when you say you want to diversify staff. Well, we can't find them. They're not here, right? I've made enough jokes about you can't keep recruiting in the same little white community. You know where people are when you want them, because using that sports analogy, and I tell people when I want to go hardcore at them, if you want to start a basketball team right now and you want your team to be competitive and viable, I guarantee you will find a bunch of folks of color to play ball. So
it won't take 5 minutes.
5
Yeah.
minutes?
5 minutes.
Yeah.
And that's because they're going to sip the coffee in between, right? But so as Tom said, earlier too, if you start looking at these children as potential employees, right? Talent for all facets of society. Like, this is a future, state senator, state Republican, state representative, future mayor, future educator, right? Future corporate person, any job we can think of. If you look at them like that and you say, like my mom always says, I'm gonna get old one day. I say, Mom, she's like, shut up. But I'm gonna get old one day. I need y'all to be smart enough to be able to take care of me. If you think that way, then you're a lot more sincere and deliberate. That's the word I was looking for, deliberate about what you're doing. I need a diverse group of people, because this is what I believe in positions, all positions, because at some point I move off the scene, I'm not gonna be out front fighting, right? And I don't want to. Told somebody last night, like, oh, we love it that you're out there fighting. I'm like, Dr. Hill's getting tired, because I've been doing this for like almost 30 years now. It's not like, I know you might think I'm 30, I'm not 30. And it's tiring. Someone else is supposed to pick up slack, and a new, battlefront comes up. It can't be the same soldiers all the time. So that's why I get tired of hearing people say, I can't find people of color. I'm like, you don't want to. It's kind of like in our rehearsal session, we were talking about, I won't throw names, but we were just talking about people saying they really don't understand. And I was like, yeah, I'm not feeling that. I'm not feeling it, because you do understand. You know what's up. You know what's at stake. Don't say that. Are we ready to have a sincere conversation and make some efforts to move forward, or we want to keep repeating the same stuff? And I think this dispensation in time, folks are just done with continued conversation.
And Terrell, that reminds me of, I was at a session last week, and a quote, and I can't even remember who said the quote, but it stuck with me, and I'm going to be using it quite often, is we act where our heart breaks. And deep.
I like that.
Right?
I like that.
Act where your heart breaks. Write it down.
Because you know you're going to hear me on a speech. So. Yes, sir. And I'm going to say credit given to somebody.
Somebody.
And I think the other thing that we keep talking about is this whole idea of equality versus equity. And what I've also noticed is everybody's cool with equality. They understand it. They, you know, everybody gets the same thing. But when you start talking about equity and going back to Terrell's word about being deliberate, people start to look at it as trade-offs. I'm giving up something for you to get something. And then the conversation stops there. But what people have to understand is that in order for things to get to an even playing field, equity, you have to be intentional. This situation that we're in was intentionally created, and you cannot fix it without being just as deliberate or intentional about, you know, fixing it and creating solutions. But equity tends to be a conversation stopper for a lot of these conversations.
And I think that's a great point, Tara. I think people can't remove seeing themselves in the position. So when you ask somebody of a higher privilege that you prefer equity, they're like, oh, that means they're going to be at a higher advantage than me, because they only see themselves in the role of getting more and being ahead of somebody else. They can't see themselves from a deprivileged point of view, having enough resources to being at this basic benchmark that's required by everybody. So I think that's an excellent point. And
I use this, right? So when we talked about, like, you know, with the first stimulus check, right? So talking to family, I'm at church, you know, and I'm not crazy. They're not crazy. I know what I make. I know what my wife makes. You know, we're blessed. I know how we live. It's not how I grew up, but I think we live differently. So never once did I have a conversation with people about the stimulus check, like, man, why is it only cut off at this? You know, and I was actually saying, like, I think folks should get more money. I repeatedly said that. They should get more money. And I have people who are in the same income strata I am, and they're like, why? Like, it's our tax money. Well, I'm like, how much do you really need it? My neighbor and I, you know, white gentleman, we had a great conversation right on the circle, right in the middle of our circle. I mean, one of my favorites conversations over these years with him. And he was like, Terrell, we have to admit, we blessed, right? He talked about, you know, not getting something at work, I think a bonus this year. But he was like, you know what, I'm okay with that if it's going to save the guys on the floor's jobs. And I'm like, that's why I love my neighbor. But I'm like, that's what I'm talking about. Like, when we get people, because my heart does break. And I'm not using the quote right now, but I love it. But my heart does break because I remember what it was like to open the refrigerator and the brightest thing in there was the bulb, right? I used to always make sure there was no color in the fridge. You can close it again, open it back up, you know, maybe a little mayonnaise, some bologna or something. And, you know, every now and again, I'll look at the fridge. My wife opened the fridge last night to do something. We got the double door, pretty French fridge, whatever. And I'm like, we got more food than a little bit in there. And my big behind don't need all that food. And I always check it because stuff goes bad and spoils. And we got 2 freezers out in the garage full. And I'm like, God, I thank you. But if I can give to someone else, that's why we're philanthropic in the whole household. Not because we're trying to floss or anything else, because we know people don't have what we have. And so I don't think it's right that I have, and I can afford to give someone something. And when people are using, you know, what Stephen's saying, like, you already sitting here. You already here. Why, what else do you want? Man, I'm only gonna be worth $4 billion now. Really? Mm-hmm. Like, we gotta start just speaking to that. Like, that's ridiculous.
And security.
And I go further, Stephen. Beyond, I used to think like that, insecure, worried. I call it hateful and selfish. You don't need that much. You don't. I'm not saying, you know, if somebody say, hey, we'll pay you $1 million this year, Dr. Hill, I'll take it. But I already know I'm gonna give. Like, my wife, the first conversation I have when I get home, after I get done dancing in the house, I'm be like, you know, babe, where can we give more? We're gonna give more. Where can we give more? That's the conversation that we always have, because we're in the same place together. And so I'm like, we know what we have. We don't need that. My children don't ask for a bunch of stuff because they already know, right? Like, I know I could get that. Like, I don't need to ask for stuff. So I'm like, you know, holiday time, is there somebody in school that you see we can just slide something to the school? They won't even know. I love doing that. Like, I don't understand why people always feel like they have to lose. You're not losing. No one's taking away my paycheck, you know, if I step back. I've actually said different times over the years, I don't need the raise. This 2%, 3%, whatever, it ain't doing nothing for me in my house. But that 2% means a lot more to somebody who's making $15 an hour. Give them the 2%. I mean, but again, Sabira, to your point earlier, in education, we think, oh, well, we don't do stuff like that in education. I'm like, why not? The budget's in payroll. If I say I don't want a raise, I'm not in a union, don't give me a raise. I'm not gonna cry. Give it to somebody who that, you know, maybe that $1,500 or $3,000, whatever, it will be significant to them. It will change their life.
I think that when we talk about education and resources, we started this conversation talking about resources, right? And when we think about what it's going to take for, I think Tara said, the intentional design that was created when it was created through the history of slavery to get us to where we are. So the intentional design to get us out of where we are lies in resources, right? But we think that the way we should fund education is equally, not through equity, right? We should equally distribute resources, and by the design from redlining that has decided where I live versus where you could live is also directly connected to the resources that goes towards education, right? So the only way for us to undo what was created is for us to start thinking about, what do we need? What resources do we need to pull us out of the situation that we are in that was created inequitably by design, so Black and brown students would not be as successful, and they would be workers, right? They would be workers for the others who were able to access the great education. The only way to solve that is to design a system that then works for them and gives them the resources that they need. So I really like what you were saying, Dr. Hill, about like, it's not about the me, it's not about like, so when you say to a person, I'm gonna throw out names of communities, however randomly, not picking on anyone, if you say to a person who lives in Avon, you're gonna get 13,000, your students are gonna get, your base is gonna be $13,000 this year. However, a little bit over the mountain in Hartford, their base should be $19,000. And I'm just randomly using numbers because these are numbers I'm creating right now, not what they actually are, because I don't want to call anybody out about their school funding numbers. Avon should not then turn around and say, oh my goodness, why is Hartford getting 19,000? It should be the students in Hartford. It's not about the city. I keep saying, like, every time we do this, when we talk about education, you're talking about the city. It's about the Black and brown babies who are sitting in Hartford who need to have access to that $19,000 to be able to be successful.
Not advocate for themselves.
Yes.
That's it. Like, what's happening in the other place has no bearing on what's happening and what the need of is the Black and brown babies wherever they may be in the state. So what I don't like is when we talk about these things, it's about what I have, and if you get something, it's going to take away from what I have. Maybe you don't need what you have. Let's talk about that. But the kids who need it need to get it. And that if that parent said, like Tara, who lives in West Hartford, and said, I want my kid to go to school in Hartford. If she doesn't need all the resources that came with her from the West Hartford school system, maybe she doesn't need to get it. Maybe she needs more. But I really think we have to start challenging these boundaries and these lines that were drawn that were based on racism. I'm gonna say the word, anyone can be as offended as they want to. These lines were drawn, these decisions were made based on racism. The only way to fix them is to undo racism, period. I don't see any other way to fix it without just saying what it is and saying the solution is about undoing that racism.
Yes.
And I'll bring in one piece that may seem contra, but it's not. But I can tell you, like, I've heard this argument a lot, particularly when our communities, our suburban communities around Hartford had to do the bailout for the water issue. And I didn't even get involved. I was like, they're gonna have to deal with it. But we, again, I will keep looking at my list over here. Everyone's involved. We gotta hold folks accountable, because I've experienced, Hartford wasn't the only inner city I experienced. I started my career in Virginia, in Newport News, Virginia. And it's like, the problem with big cities, right, is that they've spent decades being dysfunctional in so many ways. And so the kids, I agree 100% with you guys. The kids are they're just like collateral damage, because you got so many people, the same list that I got here, but you got folks, political, corporate, whatever, it doesn't matter. They just keep basically eating off the city like parasites. And no one wants to speak to that piece either. So like if folks that are like working hard, wherever you live, Avon is your example you use, and they see their tax money going somewhere, and it's the same thing for Fairfield County, right? They pay, I forgot what ridiculous percentage of all the taxes, and they look up this way and go, but they're not even handling the money well, right? So I'm saying everything has to be simultaneous. We need to make sure people are in position who are handling things properly, not mismanaging, you know, cutting scandals down. And scandals happen everywhere, but when you have a place that's been impoverished for so long, that's what people will always jump on. So I'm like, okay, I got you, I hear you, but I'm gonna clean this up, but we still are gonna need more than you over there. But I'm gonna make sure that it's handled properly. One of my biggest concerns, and I won't even say fear, but just concern, when I started High School Inc., when I realized how much money I was gonna have outside of my budget, I was like, I am going to make sure we account for every single dollar and every penny, because none of these corporations are gonna come back to me talking about, you know, oh, you just did what everybody does in education. Like and Tara's witness, they never said that to me, never, because I didn't play with the money at all. And because I knew I had so much extra money above and beyond the regular city budget amount, every year I gave back city money to the city. And the first year they were like, what are you doing? You know, you got to spend this money. I was like, that's that school mentality. I don't need it. I got goo gobs of money over here. I need you to take this money that's left in the municipal budget and help schools that I know are already out of money, because I talked to my colleagues. So that money can go to them. You can redirect those funds. I don't need those funds. I don't need another box of toilet paper. Every room has a smart board. Every teacher has a laptop. We were one-to-one before people were saying it. I don't need anything else. So why am I going to be greedy and hold on to everything?
So, Dr. Hill, I appreciate those comments. I'm going to, Tara, did you have something to say? Because we have 10 minutes left, and I wanted to, say to our audience that's left, that if you have any questions, please make sure you put them through the Q&A function of the platform. But I have one question that we did not talk about during our prep session that I'd like to pose to the panel. But Tara, if you have one more comment to make around the topic of equity.
Yeah, I just wanted to just say to Terrell too, like we're talking about this model and, you know, that this was like, you know, some type of model that works and all that, but it is. And Terrell, you had really great outcomes with your school too. It's not that you just had this money and the corporations were being really nice. You actually had like the largest gains for the high school during that time, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so I just wanted to point that out. Like while we're talking about solutions, we can talk about models, but let's talk also about models that are actually working.
Right.
Yeah.
So thanks for those comments, Tara. So just wanted to pose a question that, again, we didn't talk about, but I want to pose, because I think we've talked about the business community. We've talked about the community at large, right? The stakeholders outside the business community. We've talked about the system itself, or meaning the educators, the districts, but we haven't really talked about the Black community and the families. And what do you see as their contribution to the solution, right? The Black community. How can we help ourselves as we talk about solutions? Any thoughts? No, because we didn't discuss, I'll give you a second to kind of think about it. But oh, you're ready? Of course you're ready.
I mentioned it, right? So, like, and I think Sabira had brought that up, Tara brought it up, and Steve brought it last time at our last one, right? We're not letting families off the hook. You still have to do your job, but as Sabira had, I think it was Sabira that said it, right? But we're paying school systems. You're the paid professional, and I fully agree with that. But families, you still have to do your part too, no matter what that is going to be, right? And that's why I said we have to create that whole community-wide model, right? So if I got the grandma, the auntie, whoever, and they're working their butt off, they can't be home. They're just at work. It's just what it is, and they can't be. Why are we not utilizing, you know, our religious organizations and community organizations? And so my thing for the family would be, I need you to speak up and say, hey, this is what I need, right? So even the political process, when people think that they have to do something really great, No, you just need to speak to your own issues, right? You have people like Sabira and her organization and other organizations who they advocate and they speak up, but bring your issue forward, right? Like I'm working, I would utilize this church if it were open. And it doesn't have to be a church full of people who look like me. So I wanna make sure I clear that. The Catholic churches for generations provided space for people in various diverse communities across the nation to do recreation, tutoring, learning. Like they were doing that. Like everything about them is not bad. I don't believe everybody gets, painted with a broad brush. They were doing that. So I'm like, that's what we need to have. But I just need the family to speak up and say, this is what I need. The only time I fussed at a parent is I was like, I didn't know you need that. And I had the resources, but you never told me that. You waited until we got into this dilemma. And now you're like, breaking down like, Mr. I didn't know. I don't speak up. Just speak up for your children, right? Because I know we talk about mama bears in my house. My wife told my daughter, like, I'm gonna be very corporate and da-da-da-da-da, but if somebody messes with my child, it's gonna be mama bear. It ain't gonna be none of that corporate stuff coming out. So you act like mama bear, papa bear, grandma bear, whoever, and say what you need and you push for it. You push. And so, because the resources are there all around the community, but I would say I just need the families to speak up and speak out. They stand back too often for me. And once something happens, I'm sorry, I'm not a believer in 2020 of all that marching after the fact. It means nothing. And the politicians have figured out approximately 2 weeks, we'll move on to something else.
All right,
I would say, don't be a pawn in the system. Like, people don't show up for you, don't show up for them. I feel like we're in election season and we know where folks go when they want to get the votes. We know it's not just about voting. When you want the person to tell your story, you go knock on the door of that person that looks like the story you want to tell. We really, really need to be clear about what we want for our communities that works for us, and do not continue. I feel like we have just been too many times and too often, we allow ourselves to be used for whatever it might be, either for the political process, for the corporate process, for whatever it is. We've all been in those positions. But I really think like we need to know what we need. And I agree, ask for it. But when we're being asked in an inauthentic way, also be very clear. No, you're not going to use my face. I'm not going to tell my story for your benefit. I'm going to tell my story for my benefit, for the advancement of my people. That would be my recommendation.
All right, so I'm sorry, guys.
Wait, Dr. Hill, let me let Stephen speak.
No, this won't even be 30 seconds. Won't even be 30 seconds. Because what she just said sparked something. So one of the things I was very cognizant of at High School Inc., especially once we got rolling, and I don't know if Tara remember these situations, but there would be different organizations and companies that would want to affiliate with us, right?
Yes.
And I was very clear, no, you're not using my kids, period. Because I see the game. You're not using my kids, and I don't want your cardboard check. I'm done.
Yes. Yes.
All right, Stephen, just your perspective about what the community, what the families could do to be a part of the solution.
I think it's sometimes it's about trust. I think right now the families don't have trust in the system. They don't have trust in the teachers and the school system. And until the school system can provide that level of trust and willingness to work with them, then we'll see that type of change. So I think the best way to describe the situation is, for Black families and brown families alike, when the school is finally showing some life or some change, willing to provide your child the necessary resources, be willing to work with them and provide, X amount of effort, right? I think Sabir said it best, the school starts putting their foot forward, you got to put your foot forward. They bring the second foot forward, then you can bring the second foot forward and be able to work with them in that stride. I think oftentimes, and this is not to the fault of any Black families, but we kind of wait for the school to get all the way to the top and then we'll say, well, come. And I think, unfortunately, that's not always the most realistic scenario. Sometimes it's really going to be a step-by-step. We're going to walk in lockstep to this goal. And I think Black families have to be willing to trust the school system, but it's up to the school system to gain the Black families' trust because they've been, disrespected and left astray for so many years. It's hard to overcome that, but it's up to the school systems to do so.
All right, Tara, I'm gonna let you close this out with your response to that question, and then we'll summarize. What are your thoughts?
You know, I really don't have a whole lot to add to what's already been said. I'm a big proponent of using your voice. I see it makes a difference in the schools. I mean, I'm like Terrell's wife, Mama Bear, whatever. Like, I made it very clear with my daughter's teacher day one, like, I'm really involved in my daughter's education. Anything I see, witness, whatever, I'm at the school, I'm advocating, I'm using my voice. And I also want to say, you know, putting my corporate hat back on too, that's the same thing. I don't see corporations necessarily using their voice or casting their political chips in for education. We have a lot of influence in cities, state, whatever, and I don't think that we're using our political power as corporations to help advocate on behalf of students. And I think we could do a better job of that. So yeah, to summarize it all, I think Terrell said it, it's about using your voice and speaking up and saying what you need.
Guys, before you close off real quick, and I did this last time, I'm going to do it again. I don't like to give anybody homework, but if there is ever, I guess, thoughts or trying to gain more insight about what's being discussed here, I think reading is one of the most important things. We teach it to our kids in school. It doesn't go away once we become adults. And there's a Stanford study that looks real deeply into what we're talking about. It's called "It's Separate, Still Unequal: New Evidence on School Segregation and Racial Academic Achievement Gaps." So this is a study done by Stanford. If anybody knows Stanford, it's a really prestigious college in California. So if you have time, I'll provide Ngazi with the link to this as well. Please take a look at it.
Please do, and we'll make that available to our audience. And so thank you, Tara, thank you, Sabira, thank you, Dr. Hill and Stephen, for a very lively discussion about the solutions. We know that it's going to take a village. We know that every stakeholder involved has a part to play, including junior achievement, and we take that very seriously. So we continue to support the endeavors of building that new ladder or fixing that new ladder, but at least with our students at mind and at heart. So thank you once again. Thank you for joining us. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.